The dust from the main street of Kingfisher, Oklahoma Territory, settled on Penelope Anderson's worn boots as she stood frozen outside the whitewashed church, the preacher's words still ringing in her ears like the tolling of a funeral bell. It was the summer of 1891, and Reverend Holloway had just announced to the congregation that her 5 years of marriage without child was a sign of God's judgment, a curse upon her for sins he claimed only the Almighty could see. The late morning sun beat down mercilessly as she tried to catch her breath, her chest tight with humiliation and grief. Penelope was 24 years old. With auburn hair she kept pinned back and green eyes that had once sparkled with hope. She had married Thomas Anderson when she was 19, a union that had seemed blessed at the start. Thomas had been a quiet man, a shopkeeper who had inherited his father's general store. But 5 years of marriage had brought no children, and with each passing month, Thomas had grown colder, more distant, until he barely looked at her anymore. The other women in town had stopped inviting her to quilting bees where they cooed over their babies. The whispers had started a year ago, but now the preacher had made it official from the pulpit itself. She walked quickly down the dusty street, her Sunday dress swishing around her ankles, desperate to reach home before the tears spilled over. The town was small but growing, with wooden buildings lining both sides of the main thoroughfare. Cowboys and ranchers came through regularly, and the railroad had brought new opportunities. But for Penelope, Kingfisher felt like a prison. She pushed through the door of the small house behind the general store, grateful that Thomas had stayed behind to speak with some of the men. She needed time alone to collect herself, to figure out how to live with this pronouncement hanging over her head. The house was neat and tidy, as always. She kept it immaculate, hoping that somehow her domestic skills would make up for her failure to conceive. But it was never enough. Penelope sank into a chair at the kitchen table and finally let the tears come. She had wanted children desperately, had prayed every night for a baby to hold. She had consulted with Doc Brennan, who had found nothing wrong with her. She had drunk terrible-tasting tonics that the medicine man passing through had sold her. Nothing had worked, and now the preacher had declared her cursed. The door opened, and she quickly wiped her eyes, but it was too late. Thomas stood in the doorway, his face hard as granite. He was 32, with thinning brown hair and a permanent frown that had deepened over the years. "I cannot continue like this," he said without preamble. "You heard Reverend Holloway. It is a sign, Penelope. I need an heir for the store, someone to carry on the Anderson name." "Thomas, please," she whispered. "The Reverend does not speak for God. We can keep trying, we can know." His voice was flat. "I have already spoken to my lawyer in Guthrie. I am divorcing you. You have 1 week to gather your things and leave." The words hit her like a physical blow. Divorce was scandalous, but apparently less scandalous than a barren wife. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That is not my concern anymore." He turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the house that had never truly felt like a home. Penelope sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Then, with shaking hands, she stood and began to think practically. She had a little money saved from her household allowance, carefully squirreled away over the years. It was not much, but it might be enough to get her somewhere else, to start over where no one knew her shame. Her parents were both dead and she had no siblings. She was alone in the world. The week passed in a blur of packing and avoiding the pitying looks from neighbors. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house had been kind enough to offer her a room for a few nights while she figured out her next move, but Penelope knew she could not stay in Kingfisher. Every face she saw held judgment or pity, and she could not bear either. On her last day in town, she walked to the general store one final time. Thomas was behind the counter, helping a customer. He did not look up as she passed through, heading to the small office in the back where she had left one last box of her belongings. As she picked it up, she heard voices from the store. "Shame about your wife, Anderson." It was Jack Mallory, one of the local ranchers. "Former wife as of yesterday," Thomas said coldly. "The papers are finalized. Still, to be cursed by God like that makes you wonder what she did." Penelope fled out the back door, unable to hear any more. She carried her box to the boarding house where Mrs. Henderson waited with a sympathetic expression. "I am leaving on the afternoon stage," Penelope said quietly. "Thank you for your kindness." "Where will you go, dear?" "I heard there is work in Caldwell, Kansas, a restaurant that needs help. I can cook and clean." It was not much of a plan, but it was all she had. The older woman pressed a small package into her hands. "Some food for the journey. You are a good woman, Penelope. Do not let anyone tell you different." The stagecoach ride to Caldwell took 2 days, with an overnight stop in a small town whose name Penelope did not catch. She spent most of the journey staring out the window at the endless prairie, trying not to think about the future. The other passengers gave her curious looks, but did not engage her in conversation, for which she was grateful. Caldwell was larger than Kingfisher, a bustling cattle town near the Kansas-Oklahoma border. The restaurant owner, a gruff German immigrant named Mr. Schmidt, hired her on the spot when she showed up at his door. The pay was modest, but it included a small room above the restaurant. "You work hard, yes?" Mr. Schmidt asked in his thick accent. "We are busy here." "Cowboys come through all the time. They eat much food." "I will work hard," Penelope promised. And she did. For the next 6 months, she threw herself into her work, rising before dawn to help prepare breakfast and not stopping until long after the supper dishes were washed. The work was exhausting, but it kept her mind occupied. She barely had time to think about Thomas or Kingfisher or the preacher's cruel words. The other women who worked at the restaurant, Maria and Kathleen, were friendly enough, though Penelope kept them at arm's length. She did not want friends who would ask questions about her past. The cowboys who came through the restaurant were mostly polite, if rough around the edges. They tipped their hats and said, "Madam," and sometimes tried to flirt, but Penelope rebuffed all advances with a cool politeness that eventually made them stop trying. She had no interest in men, not anymore. It was a cold February morning in 1892, when everything changed. Penelope was serving breakfast to a group of drovers who had brought cattle up from Texas when one of them knocked over his coffee cup, sending hot liquid across the table. She jumped back, but not fast enough, and the coffee splashed onto her apron and dress. "I am so sorry, madam." The cowboy leaped to his feet, grabbing napkins to help clean up the mess. "It is all right," she said automatically, dabbing at her apron. "Accidents happen." But as she turned to go get more coffee, her foot slipped on the wet floor and she felt herself falling. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground, steadying her with a firm but gentle grip. "Careful there," a deep voice said. Penelope looked up into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. The man who had caught her was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his worn hat. He had a strong jaw shadowed with stubble and a face that was handsome in a rugged, weathered way. He looked to be in his late 20s, and there was something kind in his expression that made her breath catch. "Thank you," she managed, stepping back as soon as she found her footing. "No trouble at all, madam." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger. "Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine." She smoothed her apron, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. "Thank you for your help." She hurried back to the kitchen, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with her near fall. When she returned with a fresh pot of coffee, the man was seated at a table by himself, studying the menu. She approached cautiously. "What can I get you?" she asked, keeping her voice professional. "Eggs, bacon, biscuits if you have them," he said. "And coffee, please. We have biscuits. They are fresh this morning." "Perfect." He looked up at her again, and she noticed the warmth in his eyes. "I am Boone Randall, by the way. I am working at the Double R Ranch outside of town." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Randall." She did not offer her own name, and after a moment he nodded and let it drop. But over the following weeks, Boone Randall became a regular at the restaurant. He came in for breakfast 3 or 4 times a week, always sitting at the same table, always polite and friendly. He did not push, did not try to flirt like the other cowboys. He just talked to her like she was a person worth knowing, asking about her day, commenting on the weather, telling her amusing stories about life on the ranch. Despite herself, Penelope began to look forward to his visits. He had an easy way about him, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough cowboy exterior. He told her he had come from Missouri, that he had been working ranches since he was 16, that he loved the open spaces of the prairie. "Why Caldwell?" she asked one morning as she refilled his coffee. "Heard the Double R was looking for good hands and the pay is fair. Old man Richardson treats his workers right." He took a sip of coffee. "Plus, the food at this restaurant is the best I have had in Kansas." Penelope felt herself blush. "You are just saying that." "No, madam, I am serious." "Your biscuits could win prizes," he grinned. "Though I admit the company is not bad either." She rolled her eyes but could not suppress a small smile. "I need to get back to work, Mr. Randall." "Boone," he corrected. "Mr. Randall makes me sound old." "Boone," she conceded, and his grin widened. It was Maria who finally confronted her about it. The two women were washing dishes together one evening after the supper rush when Maria said, "That cowboy, the one who comes in all the time, he is sweet on you." "He is just friendly," Penelope said, scrubbing a pot with more force than necessary. "Penelope, he comes in 4 times a week and always sits in your section. He watches you when you are not looking. That man is smitten. It does not matter." Penelope set down the pot. "I am not interested in courting." "Why not? You are young, you are pretty. That Thomas was a fool to let you go." Penelope froze. "How do you know about Thomas?" Maria looked guilty. "Kathleen heard some cowboys talking. They had come through Kingfisher." "I am sorry, I should not have said anything." "What did they say?" Penelope's voice was barely a whisper. "Just that you had been divorced. Nothing else, I swear." But Penelope knew there had to be more. Small towns talked, and the story of the cursed Barren woman would have spread. She finished the dishes in silence, her stomach churning. Would Boone have heard? Would he look at her differently if he knew? She tried to put it out of her mind, but the worry gnawed at her. When Boone came in for breakfast 2 days later, she was stiff and formal, barely meeting his eyes. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked after she had brought his food. "No, of course not. You seem upset. If I have offended you in any way, I apologize." "You have done nothing wrong, Mr. Randall." She emphasized his last name deliberately. "I simply have a lot on my mind." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but if you ever want to talk about whatever is troubling you, I am a good listener." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her. She nodded quickly and retreated to the kitchen, where she pressed her hands against the counter and tried to steady her breathing. That night, she lay in her small room and stared at the ceiling. She was being foolish. Even if Boone did have some interest in her, it would evaporate the moment he learned the truth. She was damaged goods, cursed by God according to Reverend Holloway. No man would want her once he knew, but the heart does not always listen to reason. Over the next few weeks, despite her best efforts to maintain distance, Penelope found herself drawn to Boone. He continued to come in regularly, continued to treat her with kindness and respect. He told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about losing his parents to illness when he was 18, about making his way west to find a new life. He had a younger sister back in Missouri who had married a shopkeeper, and he sent her money when he could. "You must miss her," Penelope said one morning. "I do. But she is happy, and that is what matters. She writes me letters sometimes. Her husband is a good man." He paused. "What about you? Do you have family?" "No." The word came out more sharply than she intended. "I am alone." Something shifted in his expression, a deeper understanding. "I am sorry, that must be hard." "I manage." She softened her tone. "I should get back to work." But as she turned away, he said, "Penelope," she stopped, surprised. She had never told him her first name. "Mr. Schmidt mentioned it," he explained, reading her expression. "I hope that is all right. I think it is a beautiful name." She did not know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and hurried away, her cheeks burning. Spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and longer days. The restaurant stayed busy, and Penelope's life settled into a comfortable routine. She had been in Caldwell for nearly a year now, and while she was not exactly happy, she was at least at peace. The pain of Thomas's rejection had faded to a dull ache, and she had learned to live with the preacher's words haunting her thoughts only occasionally, usually late at night when she could not sleep. One Saturday afternoon in early April, Penelope had a rare day off. She decided to take a walk through town, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. She had just stopped to admire a display in the window of the general store when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Afternoon, Penelope." She turned to find Boone standing there, dressed in clean clothes that suggested he had come to town for reasons other than work. He looked handsome without the layer of dust and sweat that usually covered cowboys after a long day. "Boone, I did not expect to see you in town today." "It is my day off too. I was just picking up some supplies." He held up a small package. "Would you like to get a cup of coffee or something? There is a nice little tea room down the street." Penelope hesitated. This felt different from their brief conversations at the restaurant, more intentional. "I do not know if that is a good idea." "Why not?" He looked genuinely confused. "I am just asking for coffee, not proposing marriage." The word marriage made her flinch, and he noticed immediately. His expression softened. "I am sorry. That was a poor choice of words. I would just like to spend some time talking with you outside of the restaurant if you are willing, as friends." Friends. That felt safer. "All right. Coffee sounds nice." They walked to the tea room together, and Penelope was acutely aware of the curious looks from people they passed. She knew what they were thinking, seeing a divorced woman walking with a young cowboy. But Boone seemed oblivious to the attention, chatting easily about the ranch and the new foals that had been born that spring. The tea room was run by a proper English lady named Mrs. Whitmore, who served them coffee and small cakes with impeccable manners. They sat at a table by the window, and for a while they talked about inconsequential things. But eventually, Boone set down his cup and looked at her seriously. "Can I ask you something?" Penelope tensed. "I suppose." "Why do you always seem so sad? Even when you smile, there is something in your eyes. I have seen it since the first day we met." She had not expected such a direct question. "I am not sad, Penelope." He said her name gently. "I do not mean to pry. But I care about you, and I hate seeing you carry whatever burden you are bearing alone. You barely know me. Then let me know you better. Tell me what happened to make you build such walls around yourself." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, slowly, the words began to come. She told him about Thomas, about the 5 years of marriage and the growing coldness between them. She told him about the preacher's declaration, about being divorced and shunned. She did not tell him the specific words Reverend Holloway had used, could not quite bring herself to say them aloud, but she conveyed enough that he understood. When she finished, there were tears on her cheeks, and she quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. Boone reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong. "That preacher was wrong," he said firmly. "Dead wrong. You do not know that." "Yes, I do. God does not make mistakes like that, Penelope. He does not curse people for no reason, and he certainly does not curse good women who have done nothing wrong. But I cannot have children. 5 years and nothing." The doctors could find nothing wrong, which means it must be something deeper, something, or maybe it just was not meant to be with Thomas, or maybe it is not about you at all. These things are more complicated than small-minded preachers understand. His grip on her hand tightened. "You are not cursed. You are not broken. You are just a woman who has been hurt by people who should have protected you." The conviction in his voice made something inside her chest crack open. She had not realized how much she needed to hear those words, to have someone defend her against the accusations that had haunted her for so long. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat there for a while longer, hands clasped across the table until Mrs. Whitmore discreetly cleared her throat and Penelope realized they had been there for over an hour. They walked back through town together, and when they reached the restaurant, Boone turned to her. "Can I see you again? Outside of work, I mean. Maybe next Saturday we could go for a ride if the weather is nice. I would like to show you the prairie in springtime. It is beautiful." Penelope knew she should say no. She had sworn off men, off the possibility of love and all the pain it brought. But looking into Boone's blue eyes, seeing the hope and kindness there, she found herself nodding. "I would like that." His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I will pick you up at 10 o'clock. The week passed slowly. Penelope found herself thinking about Boone constantly, which both thrilled and terrified her. She told herself it was just a ride, just two friends spending time together. But in her heart, she knew it was more than that. When Saturday arrived, she dressed carefully in her best day dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. She even let her hair down, pinning back only the sides so the auburn waves fell down her back. Maria Wolfe whistled when she saw her. "You look beautiful." "That cowboy is not going to know what hit him." "It is not like that," Penelope protested weakly. "Sure it is not," Maria grinned. "Have fun and do not do anything I would not do." Boone arrived exactly at 10, leading 2 horses. He was dressed in clean clothes again, and his face was freshly shaved. His eyes widened when he saw her. "You look lovely," he said, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. "Thank you, so do you. I mean, you look nice." Now she was the one blushing. He helped her mount the gentler of the 2 horses, his hands steady on her waist as he lifted her into the saddle. They rode out of town, heading toward the open prairie. The day was perfect, with a brilliant blue sky and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. "Where are we going?" Penelope asked as they rode side by side. "There is a place I like, about half an hour from here, a little grove of trees by a creek. It is peaceful." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Penelope found herself relaxing in a way she had not in months. There was something about being out here, away from town and prying eyes, that made her feel free. When they reached the grove Boone had mentioned, she understood why he loved it. The trees were just starting to leaf out, and the creek burbled cheerfully over smooth stones. Wildflowers dotted the grass in splashes of purple and yellow. Boone spread out a blanket he had brought, and they sat together in the shade. He had also brought food from the restaurant, which made Penelope laugh. "Mr. Schmidt is going to wonder why his supplies are disappearing." "I paid for it," Boone said with mock indignation. "I am not a thief." They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily. Boone told her more about his life, about his dreams of maybe having his own ranch someday, nothing fancy but a place that was his. Penelope found herself talking about things she had not thought about in years: her childhood in Kansas before her parents died, her mother's flower garden, her father's terrible singing voice. "You laugh so rarely," Boone said at one point, "but when you do, it lights up your whole face." She felt herself blushing again. "You have a talent for saying things that embarrass me. I just speak the truth." He leaned back on his elbows, looking up at the sky through the tree branches. "Can I ask you something else? That seems to be a habit of yours." He smiled. "Do you ever think about trying again? Marriage, I mean, children." The question made her chest tighten. "I do not think any man would want me, not after what happened." "Then those men are fools." He sat up, turning to face her. "Penelope, what that preacher said, what your ex-husband did, none of that defines you. You are smart and kind and strong. Any man would be lucky to have you. You are just being nice." "No, I am being honest." He hesitated, then reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "I know we have not known each other long, but I have never met anyone like you. You make me want to be better, to work harder, to build something worth having." Penelope's breath caught. "Boone, I am not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know you need time, and I respect that. I just wanted you to know how I feel." She should pull away, should protect her heart. But instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "I am scared," she whispered. "I know, I am scared too." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "But maybe we could be scared together." When she opened her eyes, he was looking at her with such tenderness that it made her want to cry. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, nothing like Thomas's perfunctory kisses had been. This felt like a promise, like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, Penelope was trembling. "This is happening very fast. We can slow down. We can take all the time you need. But you said you wanted to know how you felt. And I do. But that does not mean we have to rush anything. We can court properly, let people see that I am serious about you. People will talk. They already know about my past. Let them talk. I do not care what anyone says." His jaw set stubbornly. "You are worth whatever gossip comes our way." They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, talking and laughing, and by the time they rode back to town, Penelope felt lighter than she had in years. Maybe, just maybe, she could have a second chance at happiness. Over the following months, Boone courted her properly. He came to the restaurant almost every day, walked her home after her shifts, took her on picnics and rides every Saturday. The town did talk, of course. Penelope heard the whispers, saw the judgmental looks from some of the more pious residents. But Boone was true to his word and did not let it bother him. "Let them say what they want," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house where she lived. "They will find something else to gossip about soon enough." Old man Richardson, the owner of the Double R Ranch, came to town one day and sought Penelope out at the restaurant. She was nervous, wondering if he was going to tell Boone to stop seeing her, but instead, he tipped his hat respectfully. "Miss Anderson, I just wanted to say that Boone is the finest hand I have got. Works harder than anyone, never complains, and the other men respect him. If he has taken a shine to you, then you must be someone special. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. You treat him right, and he will move mountains for you. That is the kind of man he is." The endorsement from Boone's employer meant more than Penelope wanted to admit. She was falling for Boone, falling hard, but there was still a part of her that held back, afraid. What if she could not give him children? What if he eventually grew to resent her the way Thomas had? One night in late June, after Boone had walked her home, she finally voiced her fears. They were sitting on the porch swing, the summer night warm and pleasant. "What if I cannot give you children?" The words burst out of her before she could stop them. What if the preacher was right and I am barren? Boone was quiet for a moment. Then he took both her hands in his. Penelope, look at me. She raised her eyes to his. I will not lie and say I have not thought about having a family someday. But here is the truth. I would rather spend my life with you and no children than with anyone else and a dozen kids. You are what matters to me, not some hypothetical future, but you, right here, right now. But what if you change your mind? What if 5 years from now you resent me? I will not. And if God sees fit to bless us with children, then that is wonderful. But if not, then we will build a different kind of life together. There are children who need homes, orphans who need families. There are 1,000 ways to build a life full of love. Tears streamed down her face. How can you be so sure? Because I love you. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I love you, Penelope. Not your ability to have children, not some idealized version of you, just you exactly as you are. She threw her arms around his neck, holding him tight as she sobbed into his shoulder. He held her, one hand stroking her back, murmuring comforting words. When she finally pulled back, he wiped her tears away with his thumbs. I love you too, she whispered. I have been so afraid to say it, but I do. I love you, Boone. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Penelope felt the last of her walls crumbling. She had been so certain she would never trust again, never love again, but Boone had proven her wrong. Marry me, he said when they finally broke apart. I know it is fast, but I have never been more sure of anything. Marry me, Penelope. Yes, she laughed through her tears. Yes, I will marry you. He whooped and picked her up, spinning her around on the porch. Mrs. Henderson stuck her head out the door, concerned, but when she saw them laughing and kissing, she smiled and closed the door again. They were married in August of 1892, a simple ceremony at the courthouse with Mr. Schmidt, Maria, and a few of Boone's friends from the ranch in attendance. Penelope wore a new dress in pale yellow that Maria had helped her pick out, and Boone wore his best suit. Old man Richardson gave them a week off as a wedding present, and they spent it in a little cabin on the ranch property, learning each other in all the ways that mattered. Penelope had been nervous on their wedding night, worried that Boone would be disappointed in her somehow. But he was patient and gentle, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and loved. And when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like two pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, Boone traced lazy patterns on her skin. No regrets, he asked softly. None whatsoever. She turned her head to kiss him. Are you joking? I am the luckiest man alive. He pulled her closer. I get to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. That is more than I ever dared hope for. They moved into a small house on the edge of Caldwell, close enough to town that Penelope could still work at the restaurant, but with enough land that Boone could keep a few horses. It was not much, but it was theirs, and they spent happy evenings fixing it up, painting walls and planting a vegetable garden. The first year of marriage flew by in a blur of happiness. Boone continued to work at the Double R, and Penelope kept her job at the restaurant, both of them saving money toward the dream of their own ranch. They were partners in every sense of the word, making decisions together, supporting each other's dreams. But as the months passed, Penelope could not help but notice the absence of a baby. They had made love countless times, and nothing had happened. The old fears began to creep back in, and sometimes she would wake in the night, anxiety twisting in her gut. What if she had been foolish to believe things could be different? What if Boone did eventually come to resent her? Boone noticed, of course. He always noticed when something was bothering her. One evening, he found her crying in the kitchen, and he immediately pulled her into his arms. "Talk to me, sweetheart. What is wrong?" "I am not pregnant," she said miserably. "It has been over a year and I am not pregnant." "So?" He pulled back to look at her. "We talked about this before we got married, remember?" "I know, but I thought maybe it would be different with you. I thought maybe I could give you what I could not give Thomas." "Penelope." He cupped her face in his hands. "Listen to me very carefully. I do not care. I married you because I love you, not because I wanted you to be some kind of baby-making machine. You are my wife, my partner, my best friend. That is enough. That is more than enough. But what about your dreams of a family?" "My dream was to find someone to love who loved me back. I have that. Everything else is just details." He kissed her forehead. "Now stop torturing yourself. If we have children someday, wonderful. If not, we will fill this house with love in other ways." She nodded, trying to let his words sink in. He had never given her any reason to doubt him, and yet the scars from her past ran deep. It would take time to fully heal, but she was grateful beyond measure to have a man who was willing to be patient. That winter, a traveling preacher came through Caldwell. Penelope was initially wary, her memories of Reverend Holloway still painful. But this preacher was different, a young man named Samuel who spoke of God's love and mercy rather than judgment and condemnation. She attended his service one Sunday, with Boone by her side, and was moved by his message. Afterward, she found herself approaching him. "Excuse me, Reverend," she said hesitantly. "May I ask you a question?" "Of course." He smiled warmly. "If a woman cannot have children, does that mean God is punishing her?" The preacher's face grew serious. "Who told you such a thing?" "Another preacher back in Oklahoma Territory." Then he was wrong. Suffering is not always a punishment, and fertility is not a measure of God's favor. The Bible is full of women who struggled to conceive, and they were beloved by God. Sarah, Rachel, Hannah, they all faced the same challenge, and their stories are told with reverence, not condemnation. Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. "But if it is not a punishment, then why?" "I do not have all the answers." Sometimes there is no why, or at least no why that we can understand in this lifetime. But I can tell you with certainty that God does not curse people arbitrarily. He does not make mistakes. The preacher glanced at Boone, who had come to stand beside Penelope. "And it seems to me that you are blessed in the ways that matter most. You have a husband who clearly adores you. Hold on to that." Boone slipped his arm around her waist. "That is what I keep telling her." They thanked the preacher and walked home, Penelope feeling lighter than she had in months. It was not a magical cure for her insecurities, but it helped to hear someone in a position of spiritual authority contradict the words that had haunted her for so long. Spring came again, bringing new life to the prairie. Penelope and Boone celebrated their second anniversary with a picnic at the same grove of trees where they had shared their first kiss. They lay on the blanket, watching clouds drift by, talking about their dreams for the future. "Old man Richardson is thinking about retiring," Boone said. "His son does not want the ranch, wants to move back east to be with his wife's family. He asked me if I would be interested in buying it." Penelope sat up, excited. "Truly? Oh, Boone, that would be wonderful. It would be a lot of work and a lot of debt, but I think we could do it. I have been saving, and the bank might give us a loan. We should do it. This is your dream." He smiled and pulled her down for a kiss. "It is our dream now." They spent the next several months working out the details. It was complicated, and there were times when it seemed like the deal would fall through, but finally, in the fall of 1894, they signed the papers. The Double R Ranch was theirs. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. They threw themselves into the work, hiring a few hands to help with the cattle and horses. Penelope left her job at the restaurant to focus on the ranch, managing the books and the household while Boone handled the livestock and land. They were busy and tired most of the time, but they were happy. The ranch began to prosper under their care, and slowly but surely, they paid down their debt. Boone's reputation as a fair employer and skilled rancher spread, and they had no trouble finding good men to work for them. One evening in the spring of 1895, Penelope was sitting on the porch going over the accounts when she felt a strange flutter in her stomach. She frowned, thinking perhaps she had eaten something that disagreed with her. But the feeling persisted over the next few days, and gradually, she began to realize what it might mean. She was afraid to hope, afraid to even think the words. But when she missed her monthly courses for the second time, she could no longer deny the possibility. Trembling, she went to see Doc Brennan, the same doctor who had examined her years ago in Kingfisher and found nothing wrong. "Well, Mrs. Randall," he said after his examination, his eyes twinkling, "I have some news for you." "What is it?" "You are going to have a baby." "I would say you are about 3 months along." Penelope stared at him, unable to process the words. "That is not possible." "I assure you it is quite possible. In fact, it is happening," he smiled. "Congratulations." She walked home in a daze, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach. A baby. After all these years, after all the pain and doubt and fear, she was going to have a baby. It felt like a dream, like something that could not possibly be real. Boone was in the barn when she got home, and she stood in the doorway, watching him work with one of the horses. He was covered in dust and sweat, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, and she had never loved him more than in that moment. "Boone," she called softly. He looked up, smiling when he saw her. "Hey, sweetheart, give me just a minute to finish up here." "Boone, I need to tell you something." Something in her voice made him stop immediately. He walked over to her, concern in his eyes. "What is wrong? Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine." She took his hands, holding them tight. "I am pregnant." He went very still. "What?" "I am pregnant. About 3 months along, according to Doc Brennan." For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, growing wider and wider until he was grinning like a fool. He let out a whoop and picked her up, spinning her around just like he had the night they got engaged. "We are having a baby." He set her down gently, his hands going to her stomach. "We are really having a baby. We are really having a baby." She was laughing and crying at the same time. He kissed her, deep and passionate, then dropped to his knees and kissed her stomach. "Hello in there, little one. I am your papa and I already love you so much." Penelope ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with emotion. After everything they had been through, all the pain and doubt, this moment felt like a miracle. The months of her pregnancy passed in a blur of excitement and preparation. Boone was ridiculously overprotective, insisting she rest more, not work too hard, eat well. Penelope found it both endearing and exasperating, but she indulged him because she knew it came from a place of love. They fixed up one of the spare bedrooms as a nursery, painting it a cheerful yellow and building a crib from scratch. The ranch hands were excited too, already placing bets on whether the baby would be a boy or a girl. Penelope wrote a letter to Boone's sister in Missouri, sharing the news. A few weeks later, she received an enthusiastic reply congratulating them and promising to send baby clothes. As her belly grew, Penelope found herself thinking about Reverend Holloway and Thomas. She wondered what they would say if they knew. Would they believe she had been cursed after all, and that the curse had been lifted? Or would they find some other way to diminish her happiness? But then she would feel the baby kick, or Boone would come in from working and place his hand on her stomach with such wonder on his face, and she would realize she did not care what anyone else thought. She had found love and happiness, and she was going to be a mother. That was all that mattered. In late November of 1895, Penelope went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly a full day, but Boone stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and encouraging her. Finally, as the sun was setting, their son was born. He was small and red and wrinkled, and he was the most beautiful thing Penelope had ever seen. The midwife cleaned him up and placed him in her arms, and Penelope felt a surge of love so powerful it took her breath away. "We have a son," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Boone was crying too, staring at the baby with awe. "He is perfect. You are amazing. I love you so much." They decided to name him Matthew after Boone's father, Matthew Boone Randall. He had his father's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair, and Penelope could not stop staring at him. "I cannot believe he is real," she said softly. "After all this time, I was so sure it would never happen." Boone kissed her forehead. "God does not make mistakes like that, remember? I told you that the day we had coffee together. You were always meant to be a mother. It just had to be with the right person at the right time." She thought about that, about the long road that had brought her here. The pain with Thomas, the preacher's cruel words, the divorce and shame. If she had not gone through all of that, she would never have ended up in Caldwell. She would never have met Boone. She would never have experienced this perfect moment. "I am glad it happened this way," she said. "I am glad I found you. Me too, sweetheart, me too." The first few months with a baby were exhausting. Matthew was a good baby, but he still needed constant care, and Penelope and Boone took turns getting up with him at night. The ranch hands were surprisingly helpful, the older ones offering advice and the younger ones happy to play with the baby when they had spare time. Maria came to visit from Caldwell, bringing gifts and congratulations. She held Matthew and cooed over him, then looked at Penelope with satisfaction. "I knew that Cowboy was good for you. I knew it from the start." "You were right," Penelope admitted. "I am glad I listened to you." As Matthew grew, he became the center of their world. He was a happy baby, always smiling and laughing, and watching Boone with him made Penelope fall in love with her husband all over again. Boone was a natural father, patient and gentle, teaching Matthew about horses and cattle as soon as he could toddle around. When Matthew was 2 years old, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear or disbelief, just pure joy. Their daughter, Rose, was born in the spring of 1898, a beautiful baby girl with red hair like her mother and her father's infectious smile. "Our family is complete," Boone said, holding Rose while Matthew climbed all over him, demanding attention. "It is perfect," Penelope agreed. The ranch continued to prosper. Boone's hard work and fair dealing earned them a good reputation, and they became well respected in the community. Penelope joined the church, a small congregation with a kind pastor who preached love rather than judgment. She made friends with the other ranch wives, women who accepted her without question. One day, when Matthew was 5 and Rose was 3, a family passed through Caldwell on their way west. Penelope happened to be in town when she saw them, and her heart stopped. It was Reverend Holloway, looking older and more severe than ever, accompanied by his wife and grown children. She froze, part of her wanting to flee but another part of her standing firm. Holloway saw her, and his eyes widened slightly in recognition. He walked over, his expression disapproving. "Penelope Anderson," he said, "or should I say Mrs. Randall now? I heard you remarried." "Yes, I did." She kept her voice steady. "And I heard you have children, 2 of them." His tone suggested he did not believe it. "Yes, Matthew is 5 and Rose is 3. His face darkened. "Then perhaps you were not as cursed as I believed, or perhaps God has chosen to show mercy." Something inside Penelope snapped. All the years of pain, of believing his words, of doubting herself, came flooding back. But this time, instead of cowering, she stood tall. "With all due respect, Reverend, you were wrong. God never cursed me. My first husband was the wrong man, and your words caused me years of unnecessary pain. But I am grateful now, because that pain led me to a man who truly loves me, who never once made me feel like I was broken or less than. So thank you, in a way, for being so cruel. It taught me to recognize real love when I found it." Holloway's face turned red. "How dare you speak to me that way? I am a man of God." "Then perhaps you should act like one and stop judging people you know nothing about." She turned and walked away, her head held high. When she got home and told Boone what had happened, he pulled her into a tight embrace. "I am so proud of you," he murmured into her hair. "That took real courage. I should have said it years ago. You said it when you were ready. That is what matters." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Matthew and Rose playing in the yard, Penelope reflected on how far she had come. She thought about the broken woman she had been, standing outside that church in Kingfisher, believing she was cursed and worthless. She thought about the long journey to Caldwell, the months of working at the restaurant, the fear and doubt that had plagued her. And then she thought about Boone, about the first time he had caught her when she slipped, the gentle kindness in his eyes. She thought about his words that day at the tea room. God does not make mistakes like that. He had been the first person to truly see her, to love her not despite her perceived flaws but simply for who she was. "What are you thinking about?" Boone asked, reaching over to take her hand. "Just how lucky I am, how different my life could have been. I am the lucky one. You gave me everything I ever wanted and more." Matthew came running up to the porch, demanding that his father come play with him. Rose toddled after her brother, her red curls bouncing. Boone stood, pulling Penelope to her feet as well. "Come on, Mrs. Randall. Our children need us." She laughed and let him lead her down into the yard, where they spent the evening playing with Matthew and Rose until the stars came out. Later, after the children were in bed, Penelope and Boone lay together in their own bed, wrapped in each other's arms. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too. Always have, always will." She fell asleep with a smile on her face, secure in the knowledge that she was loved, that she was enough, that she had found her place in the world. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and challenges. The ranch grew, and they hired more hands to help manage it. Matthew grew into a strong boy who loved working with the horses, while Rose was more interested in helping her mother with the garden and the chickens. They were different children, but both were loved fiercely by their parents. When Matthew was 10 and Rose was 8, Penelope was surprised to discover she was pregnant again. At 38, she had not expected to have another child, but both she and Boone were thrilled. Their third child, a son they named James, was born in the winter of 1903. "3 children," Boone said, holding the baby while Matthew and Rose peered at their new brother with fascination. "We are truly blessed." "We are," Penelope agreed. "More blessed than I ever dreamed possible." As James grew, he proved to be a happy, energetic child who kept them all on their toes. The house was full of noise and laughter, and Penelope often found herself pausing in her work just to appreciate the life she had built. One evening, when James was about 2, Penelope and Boone were sitting on the porch after the children had gone to bed. It had become their favorite time of day, a chance to talk and reconnect after the busyness of ranch life and parenting. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had stayed with Thomas?" Boone asked. Penelope considered the question. "Sometimes. I think I would have been miserable. He was never going to love me the way I needed to be loved, and I would have spent my whole life feeling like a failure. You could never be a failure. I know that now, but it took meeting you to truly believe it. She leaned her head on his shoulder. What about you? Do you ever regret marrying me? Not for one single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope. You and our children. He kissed the top of her head. I would go through everything again, all the hard times and struggles, just to end up right here with you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out. The prairie stretched out before them, vast and beautiful, and Penelope felt a deep sense of peace. This was her home, these were her people, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. Matthew grew into a fine young man, as skilled with horses as his father. He took over more and more of the ranch work as Boone got older, and eventually, Boone began teaching him the business side of things as well. Rose, meanwhile, surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to be a teacher. She went to normal school in Kansas City, and came back to Caldwell to teach at the small schoolhouse. James was still young, but he showed signs of being the most adventurous of the three children. He was always climbing trees or exploring the creek, giving his mother heart palpitations on a regular basis. But he had a good heart and was kind to everyone he met. As Penelope and Boone entered their 50s, they began to slow down a bit, letting Matthew take on more responsibility for the ranch. They spent more time together, taking long rides across the prairie like they had in the early days of their courtship. One day, Boone took her back to the grove of trees where they had shared their first kiss, now more than 20 years ago. They spread out a blanket and lay side by side, holding hands and watching the clouds drift by. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Boone asked. "Of course." "I was so nervous. I did not think I would ever be able to trust anyone again, let alone fall in love. I was nervous too. I was terrified you would reject me." She turned her head to look at him. His hair was silver now, and there were lines around his eyes, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. "I am so glad I did not." "Me too, sweetheart, me too." They talked about their children, about Matthew's plans to marry a local girl named Sarah, about Rose's success as a teacher, about James's antics. They talked about the ranch and their plans for the future. And they talked about the past, about how far they had both come. "I never thanked you properly," Penelope said softly. "For what? For believing in me when I did not believe in myself. For seeing past the broken woman I was and loving me anyway." Boone turned on his side to face her. "You were never broken, Penelope. You were hurt, and there is a difference. And I did not love you anyway. I loved you because of who you are, because of your strength and courage and kindness. Those words you said, that first day we really talked, about God not making mistakes like that, they saved me, Boone. They gave me hope when I had none left. I just spoke the truth. That preacher in Kingfisher was wrong, and I could not stand by and let you keep believing his lies." He reached out and tucked a strand of gray-streaked hair behind her ear. "You have given me the most amazing life. 3 beautiful children, a successful ranch, and most importantly, your love. I am the luckiest man alive. I love you, Boone Randall, with everything I am. And I love you, Penelope Randall, forever and always." They stayed at the grove until the sun began to set, then rode back to the ranch hand in hand. The house was full when they arrived, with Matthew and his new bride Sarah visiting for supper, and Rose home for the weekend, and James racing around trying to show everyone the interesting rock he had found. Penelope stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching her family, and felt tears prick at her eyes. Happy tears, grateful tears. She thought about the preacher who had told her she was cursed, about the husband who had cast her aside. If she could go back and tell that devastated woman standing outside the church in Kingfisher what the future held, she would hardly believe it, but it was all real. The love, the laughter, the family she had never thought she would have. And it had all started with a cowboy who saw past her pain and loved her anyway, who had spoken words of hope when she needed them most. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Penelope and Boone lay together in the darkness of their bedroom. His arm was around her and her head rested on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Boone," she whispered. Do you think Reverend Holloway ever realized he was wrong?" Boone was quiet for a moment. "I do not know. Some people are too prideful to admit when they have made a mistake, but it does not matter anymore, does it? His words do not have power over you." "No, they do not. Not anymore." She pressed a kiss to his chest. "Thank you for that. Thank you for showing me I was never cursed, never broken. Just waiting for the right person to love me the way I deserved. Always, sweetheart, always." They drifted off to sleep together as they had every night for over 20 years, and in the morning they would wake up and face another day together as they would for all the days to come. The years continued their gentle march forward. Matthew and Sarah had 3 children of their own, making Penelope and Boone grandparents. Rose eventually married as well, a kind schoolteacher from a neighboring town, and they had 2 children. James, true to his adventurous nature, spent several years traveling before finally settling down with a rancher's daughter. The ranch prospered under Matthew's management, though Boone still went out to check on things every day. He could not quite give up the work that had defined so much of his life. Penelope spent her days tending her garden, which had grown quite large over the years, and doting on her grandchildren when they visited. One summer afternoon, when Penelope was 62 and Boone was 65, they were sitting on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. There were 7 of them now, ranging in age from 2 to 14, and they were a noisy, joyful bunch. "Can you believe we made all this?" Boone asked, gesturing to the chaos before them. "Sometimes I still cannot. It feels like a dream. The best dream." He squeezed her hand. "You know, I was thinking about that day we met when you slipped and I caught you. What if I had not been there? What if you had fallen? Then I suppose I would have gotten some bruises and we might never have spoken." Penelope smiled. "But you were there. God put you in my path exactly when I needed you. I used to think I was the one doing the saving, but the truth is, you saved me too. Before I met you, I was just drifting, working from ranch to ranch with no real purpose. You gave me a reason to build something, to put down roots. We saved each other then. I like that." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Partners in everything." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, their children and grandchildren gathered on the porch for supper. It was a tradition they had started years ago, family suppers on Sunday evenings. The table was crowded and loud, with everyone talking over each other and the children begging for extra dessert. Penelope looked around at the faces of her family, at the love and laughter that filled her home, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. She caught Boone's eye across the table, and he winked at her, that same mischievous spark that had first drawn her to him all those years ago. After supper, after the dishes were washed and the grandchildren had been bundled off home, Penelope and Boone took their usual evening walk around the property. The night was warm and clear, with a million stars overhead. "I have been thinking," Boone said as they walked. "Maybe it is time we finally take that trip to Missouri, visit my sister. We have been saying we would do it for years. I would like that. It would be nice to meet her in person after all these years of letters. Then let us do it, this fall after the harvest. We will take the train and spend a few weeks there. It is a plan." Penelope leaned into him as they walked, I love making plans with you. Even after all these years, I still get excited about our future together. That is because we are still in love like a couple of kids." He grinned. "I may be an old man now, but you still make my heart race, Penelope Randall. And you still make me feel like the luckiest woman alive." They made the trip to Missouri that fall, and it was everything they had hoped for. Boone's sister welcomed them with open arms, and they spent happy weeks getting to know her family and seeing the places where Boone had grown up. It was a trip full of laughter and memories, and it reminded them both that they still had so much life left to live together. As they sat on the train heading back to Kansas, Penelope rested her head on Boone's shoulder and reflected on the extraordinary life they had built. From the ashes of her first marriage, from the pain of being told she was cursed, had risen something beautiful and lasting. She had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, a thriving ranch, and most importantly, a husband who loved her completely and unconditionally. "What are you thinking about?" Boone asked, as he so often did. "Just counting my blessings. There are so many of them. We have been blessed indeed." He kissed the top of her head. "But you know what the greatest blessing is?" "What?" "You. Always you, Penelope. From the moment I caught you in that restaurant, I knew my life was about to change, and it did in all the best ways." Tears pricked at her eyes, happy tears that seemed to come more easily these days. "I love you, Boone. Thank you for proving the preacher wrong. Thank you for showing me that God does not make mistakes, that I was not cursed or broken, just waiting for the right person to love." "I love you too, sweetheart, and I will keep proving it every day for the rest of our lives." They returned to the ranch to find everything running smoothly under Matthew's care. Life settled back into its comfortable rhythm, the seasons turning as they always had. Winter came, bringing snow and cold, followed by the rebirth of spring. Summer blazed hot and bright, and then autumn arrived with its harvest and golden light. And through it all, Penelope and Boone remained each other's constant companion, each other's greatest love. They grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced the challenges that come with age, aches and pains, fading eyesight, the occasional illness, but they faced them together, never alone. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate, and there was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Penelope wore a beautiful new dress that Rose had helped her pick out, and Boone wore his best suit. As they danced together in the barn that had been decorated for the occasion, Penelope looked up at her husband and marveled at how much she still loved him, how much he still made her heart sing. 30 years, she said. "Can you believe it? Best 30 years of my life." He twirled her around, making her laugh. "Here is to 30 more. I will take as many as God gives us." "Me too, sweetheart, me too." The party went on late into the night, and when everyone had finally gone home, Penelope and Boone walked hand in hand back to their house. The stars were bright overhead, and the prairie stretched out around them, vast and beautiful. "You know," Boone said as they reached the porch, "I have been thinking about that preacher in Kingfisher." "What about him?" "I hope someday he realized how wrong he was, not for our sake but for his. Because living with that kind of judgment in your heart, that kind of certainty that you speak for God when you are really just speaking from your own prejudices, that has to be a heavy burden to carry." Penelope considered this. "I forgave him a long time ago. Not because he deserved it, but because carrying that anger was hurting me more than him. You are a better person than me. I am still angry on your behalf." She smiled and cupped his face in her hands. "And that is one of the many reasons I love you. You are always in my corner, always ready to defend me. Always will be, as long as I am breathing." They went inside, checking on James, who was asleep in his old bedroom he had stayed over to help with the party preparations. Then they went to their own room, where Boone helped Penelope out of her dress and into her nightgown, his touch still tender after all these years. As they lay in bed together, wrapped in each other's arms, Penelope thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the girl she had been when she married Thomas, full of hope and dreams. She thought about the broken woman she had become, standing outside that church believing she was cursed. And then she thought about the woman she was now, loved and cherished, mother and grandmother, partner to the man who had shown her that she was never broken at all. Just waiting, just becoming the person she needed to be to recognize true love when it finally arrived. Boone. She whispered into the darkness. Yes, sweetheart, thank you for catching me that day in more ways than one. She felt him smile against her hair. Thank you for letting me, for trusting me with your heart after it had been so badly hurt, for building this life with me, for everything. I would do it all again just to end up here with you. Me too. Every single day. They fell asleep together as they had for 30 years, as they would for all the years to come. And somewhere in the quiet of the night, in the warmth of their love and the peace of their home, the last echoes of the preacher's cruel words finally faded away completely, replaced by the truth that Boone had spoken all those years ago. God does not make mistakes like that. And he had not made a mistake with Penelope. He had simply been preparing her for the love she was always meant to find, with the cowboy who saw her worth when she could not see it herself, who loved her not for what she could give him but for who she was. Together, they had built a life full of love and laughter, children and grandchildren, joy and purpose. It was, in every way that mattered, a perfect ending to a story that had begun in pain, but ended in the most beautiful kind of happiness. The kind that is earned through trial and perseverance, through faith and love, through two people choosing each other every single day and building something that would last forever. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. Inside the house, Penelope and Boone slept peacefully, surrounded by the life they had created, the love they had nurtured, and the unshakable knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged together, always together, until the end of their days and beyond.